So, which is better, Assassin's Creed 2 or Origins? Well, I'd be willing to bet that the resounding answer unanimously would be Assassin's Creed 2. My question is, did Ubisoft make the right decision to take the franchise in a vastly different direction, changing all aspects of these well-established games and flipping them on their head, with introducing a whole new combat system, NPC interactions, and an entirely different range of characters to further extend the AC universe, giving us further backstory into the everlasting war between the Assassins and the Templars. Now, living up to Ezio was always going to be a feat not to be taken lightly, but the ability to do this was proven to be a success with such fantastic characters like Connor from AC3, Edward from Black Flag, and Jacob and Evie Fry from Syndicate. From the start of the series, Ubisoft has shown real creativity and an amazing ability to create a living, breathing universe that is rich with lore and a fantastic story every single release. Let's explore the main differences between the old gen and the new releases. There is something to be said about difference in the series. I'm not saying there's never been change throughout the series up to Origins, but each difference was more of a minor change, with each one offering slight improvements to the experience. Whether it's being able to build a small army in Brotherhood, or the hook blade in Revelations that allowed Ezio to climb further or zip wire to a destination, whereas in AC3, where Connor was able to do the unthinkable, climb trees. Now that was the true revelation. As well as the combat and climbing mechanics added to each title, there was some huge changes happening to the bare bones of these games. The way you progress the story, find targets and evade enemies changes greatly in the early games. I think all of us OGs that actually played AC1, despite being groundbreaking in its own right, wasn't exactly perfect. Gameplay was slow, repetitive and utterly linear. There is nothing inherently wrong with a linear story, but that wasn't the issue. The gameplay was. AC1 showed us what huge potential this series had, and 2 years later the fan base was blown away with AC2. They changed the scout, hunt and kill formula and vetoed for a more Hollywood style script story, with each mission pushing you forward into the timeline of young Ezio. What followed each year was a slow progression into a complex story and timeline that is the AC universe. Changeover into next gen, starting with Origins, it seems that they keep some elements of their formula that has been developed over an 8-year period, but in most respects they just press the restart button. The game doesn't push stealth, the selling point of the original AC games and the developer's main vision. Rather than a sneaky badass assassin that used wit, skill and planning to kill your targets, you find yourself just being a strong badass. And in my opinion, this took the game in such a different direction that you can no longer call these 3 games true Assassin's Creed games in relation to the gameplay. The combat system in the later games, Origins, Odyssey and Valhalla, is more Souls-like by using the rear buttons and triggers to fight. This was completely different to any AC game we had previously played, creating a feeling of confusion. Am I playing this game for the challenge or for the story? AC has always been about the story and the feeling of being a free-running, stealthy, unstoppable force. The new gen seems to be more for the grind, challenging gameplay and the abundance of pointless side quests. Come on, just let Skyrim be Skyrim. Look, if you like that kind of thing, then good for you. All I'm saying is I don't want to have to grind to level 45 just to play the next story mission. It's a total break of immersion. The way they've done the Hidden Blade in the later games is terrible. They've done it dirty. A true staple of the franchise, the mark of the Assassins, and in the new gen games is half of what it actually should be. Wiping out a stronghold using only stealth and a perfectly timed Hidden Blade attack was the best way to play these games. The Hidden Blade is now a joke. Perhaps you can take on a couple of low level guards on your way through, but no doubt you'll go for a kill. The guard would just take it on the chin, turn around and start beating your ass, forcing you to take on 25 enemies at once. You then proceed to run to the closest bush and start again. Where's the fun in that? The point is to feel like a fully trained elite assassin. Let's just address the elephant in the room. First on this point, Ezio Auditore is and will forever be the best character in this series. So now that's out of the way, I want to address the overall feel with the protagonists in the new gen games as a direct comparison to the older gen. We start with Bayek, the Medjay from Egypt around the year 48 BC. I must say, as a protagonist he did come out strong as the grandfather of the Assassins movement. He had a great personality, decent story and overall you felt connected to Bayek. I found myself intrigued with his story and enjoyed every development in his story. No complaints from me here. Secondly, we had male-female mercenary. Yes, we didn't even get an established character in this edition, highlighting exactly what went wrong with this title. We got Alexios and Cassandra. They went for a more of a create your own path kind of thing here. This is just not what AC has ever been about. You're supposed to be led through their story and shown a great journey of self-understanding and more importantly the history of the AC cause. With these characters, I felt that we have removed from the true story in place of a more custom experience. To be honest, I was not convinced by this approach. In Valhalla, they jump on the trend of Vikings. I haven't had much time in this title, but they once again opt for the choose your own either. I'm not convinced on this. Sometimes I do wonder that the inclusion of a choice-based character in what should be linear stories could be a small echo of pandering. Do they just include these options to appease a political correctness outcry, or do they believe the experience is improved? If you want to tell a story from a female or male's perspective, just make the story fit around them. What you definitely shouldn't do is just make a completely generic story that suits both equally. It removes the nitty-gritty details that you can no longer include. Around the time frames of when these games are set, the upbringing of a little boy or girl is different. If we want to use history as an inspiration, then that is fine to admit. In the elder stories in every release, we had fully fleshed out characters with full backstories and events that made them the person you accompany. In some of the games, you can even play through their early years, giving you some foreshadowing of for what is to come or the motivations of the characters. Moments like this gave you a closer connection to each person, and it made you feel that their story was your story. Take the case of Assassin's Creed 3. We played as Connor, a simple Native American boy that has no idea of his future destiny or his Templar roots. The game casts a huge shadow at the start of the game of who will be a huge part of our protagonist's life by actually putting you in the shoes of Hafen Kenway, a Templar, the enemy that you had been fighting for the past 4 games. Doing this made the Templars feel more personal. I won't divulge too far into the twist of the game because I do understand that many people may still not have played this game all the way through. If you're one of those people, I would implore you to absolutely do it. AC3 is one of the best of the series. From gameplay mechanics to story driven mechanics, everything has changed from old to new. Have they improved on anything since the old gen? I would say not really. Starting from the UI, the whole fake mouse movements can be convenient sometimes, but most of the time you find yourself fighting with it. Just keep it on the PC or maybe fix your UI to suit consoles as well. The parkour mechanics were always a large part of AC, and it is good to still see these in recent games, but they have lost their charm. Although Unity had a rough release, I think you can find the most fluid parkour hidden there. In the newer titles you can still scale buildings and use these skills to a similar level, but they seem to skimp out on the animations nowadays. There is nothing fancy or particularly cool about it anymore, it's just I can climb up something and climb down something, with less fluidity than ever before. The combat has always been questionable in the early AC games. You could pretty much complete most of them by just using the counter button. It was a little bit too easy. They changed this up a couple of times between games, but most of the time the combat did feel quite familiar between every game, with a lot of changes only coming from the time period you are in, like the introduction to the hidden crossbow via the phantom blade, or most obviously the introduction of guns. As mentioned previously, Ubisoft completely overhauled the combat system, opting for the Souls-esque control system. This is a very strange route to take. My initial thoughts on the system were, what the hell is this? After getting used to it, I understood the point of them adding this layout. I believe having this kind of scheme makes the player want to play more aggressively and use their newfound abilities to the fullest. If you have a different thoughts on this, give me your opinion in the comments. Now for the story elements, including the side quests and others, etc. The first AC was understandably very simple. This is probably due to the budget and other limitations at the time, so I'm going to glaze over this one in that regard. But that is not to undermine the significance of this entry, the granddaddy of the series. Going into the Assassin's Creed 2 all the way up to Syndicate, the process was fairly similar. You were placed in an open world with a clear path of where to go, and you had usually been introduced to the character and their personal goals or stories in the prologues of the game. You can follow the stories which is heavily pushed or explore the world with a small amount of side quests and usually a couple of collection based quests. That is the usual setup for an AC game. The newer gen went for a kind of a Witcher approach where you find yourself in a huge open world with bundles and bundles of level based missions. You are forced to grind your way through. Due to this grinding you are completely removed from actually enjoying the story for what it actually is, because you are always chopping and changing from quest line to quest line. Next thing you know, you don't know your Cassandra to your Ivor. It's confusing. I can't tell you how many times I just got annoyed with the system and gave up for a few months on these games and just walked away. When you eventually come back you have no idea what you're doing, you have 8 quests outstanding, have to talk to 4 NPCs and are hunting 2 cultists. I'm not a fan of this, to say the least. There is so much to say on this subject, it's close to my heart. I remember falling in love with Altair and the Assassins all the way back in 2007. Overall, I think you can't deny that these new gen games do have some pretty good moments, and there is no doubt that they are good games in their own right, but that's exactly the problem. They are their own entity, their own separate experience, and by all rights, they are their own game entirely now. Personally, I prefer the older games for many reasons which I have highlighted already, but maybe that's just a boomer in me. At least we still have those epic memories left on us by Ezio and the gang. Anyway, let me know your thoughts on this in the comments below. Smash like and subscribe. Bye bye.